Look, every dollar we spent on marketing, we needed to make a return on, So we, in the early days, we bootstrapped this business, and it was hard because it was it was a fast growing business. So there's always a lot of pressure on working capital.
Hello and welcome to Starting Small. My name is Nagle, and what you're about to hear is a resilient story to an entrepreneur's journey over the brand that we know and consume today. At Starting Small, I believe that everyone has a story to tell under one philosophy. Everyone starts small. Even these founders have once started where you are, in their parents' kitchen, basement, out of a wagon, and many more. At Starting Small, we discuss the strategies used, the obstacles overcome, and the successes of an entrepreneur's journey. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this episode of Starting Small, and make sure to leave a review to let us know how you enjoyed it. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Oliver Cousins of MAAP. Oli, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thanks for having me. Yeah, pleasure to have a chat.
Of course. So I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
Wow, that's a big question. I grew up in Melbourne, so I've always lived in Melbourne, Australia. Pretty normal childhood, I would say. Like, I grew up surfing. That was sort of really my passion as a sport. I played lots of sports, but mostly traditional sports, football, Australian rules football, cricket. But yeah, surfing was really the first one where I would say, passionate about.
Yeah.
But because we lived in Melbourne, we had to sort of travel down the coast, on the weekends. And it wasn't something I could do every day. So I was never a brilliant surfer, but it was something that I probably did it up until I was, in my late 20s.
Okay.
But yeah, other than that, pretty standard high school. I didn't really know what I wanted to do after high school. So, I went to university and dropped out after 6 months. I started working as a furniture removalist, of all things, which was, eye-opening. And ultimately that led me back to thinking about what I could do with my future. And I chose a fashion design course, which just happened to be down the coast. So I was sort of ticking off two boxes there. One, getting back into something I thought I would like, and also being able to sort of be down the coast and surf and have that lifestyle. So
definitely.
That was, I honestly remember just picking up the book, the course guide, and just flicking through the course guide and trying to find something to do. That was kind of an odd way to do it, but I stopped on fashion design, and it sort of spoke to me in some way, and jumped in and really enjoyed it. And it wasn't a really high level fashion design course. It was really quite practical. It was what we call TAFE here. But it was fantastic. It was really, 40 contact hours a week plus homework, and it was quite full on. And really the purpose of that course was to just get your start in the industry. So
yeah,
I think after 2 years, I got offered a job at Globe, which is a large skateboarding company in Melbourne here, which you're probably familiar with. They have they were really an amazing business, because they had probably 30 brands under their umbrella. So in Melbourne, they were sort of a company where a lot of junior people would cut their teeth, so there were so many opportunities within that business, whether you were sort of in surf or skate or streetwear or more fashion focused brands,
Mm-hmm.
So for me, when I sort of got that offer, I was like, well, look, the course I did was really geared towards just getting me into the workforce.
Yeah.
And so I left and took the job, and I spent 12 years at Globe, and I learned everything I know from that business. I left halfway through and went to another business in Sydney, and then came back and continued with Globe for another 7 years. But all up, that was really where I sort of learned everything I know about the industry, and about making clothes and designing garments, and so it was a really great pathway, to where I am today.
Yeah. So mentioning where you're at today from that, what were some of your major roles at that company, Globe, at the time? Were you on the design side? What was your roles?
Yeah, I mean, like I started in production, so I was the production assistant, getting paid, minimum wage basically. A year later, I had a small pay rise, and just sort of worked my way up. But I always wanted to get into design. That was where my passion was. But it took me a couple of years to be able to sort of prove that I could get into that.
Yeah.
So I started designing for various brands, and then ultimately I landed the head design job at Stussy, which was a license from, Stussy in the US. It was licensed down here by Globe for the Southern Hemisphere. And that was a brand I always admired. I think it's a brand that is still enduring, after 30 years, it's really incredible. So I was excited to do that. I left Stussy to follow a girl up to Sydney that I was in love with, and took a job at Mambo, which is another iconic Australian surf brand. And that was a really great experience. So I was up there for 2.5 years, and then I came back to Globe because I really resonated with the founders, the management team, and they asked me to come back in a more senior role as design director. So ultimately, I sort of worked my way up through to the design director, and oversaw all of their apparel design for that brand. So
wow. So with that niche of surfing, skateboarding, where does this interest in cycling come into play here? I know it's a different industry.
Yeah, good question. Definitely. Good question. Yeah, they're sort of polar opposites, aren't they? Even when so I was probably wasn't until I was about 30 and I had kids. And I was working, full time, obviously working pretty hard, and just couldn't make my way down the coast. Melbourne is a bay, so to get to the surf, you've got to travel an hour and a half each way to find waves. Yeah. So it becomes, excuse me, it becomes a pretty big day. It's 3 hours of driving plus a couple of hours in the water. So, I had a friend, Jared, who ultimately became my business partner. Who had been cycling for years and racing and running his own team, and I'd always sort of watched from the sidelines as to what he was doing, and ultimately over time he wore me down and got me on a bike, and once I sort of experienced it, the rest was history, obviously. But so I think it sort of just transitioned. I ended up replacing surfing with cycling ultimately, and it's just something that it spoke to me. It's still in the outdoors. You're still experiencing, nature and discovery. It's a sport that you can travel with really well. I love traveling with my bike and exploring new cities and things like that. So it's a similar way to surfing. It's like also a great sport to travel with. So for me, it just sort of spoke to me, and that's kind of how it came about. But it was back then, in 2014, it wasn't cool really to be a cyclist. It was still kind of, had a lot of negative connotations towards it, whether it be middle-aged men in Lycra or, so even rocking up to Globe, wearing my cycling kit, and, that was shocking for a lot of people in the skate industry, So I think now it's a lot of that's changed. I think a lot of the sort of preconceptions around the sport have been sort of broken down. All those barriers have been broken down. So it was a very different landscape back then. It's always been a cool sport in my eyes. Like it's an amazing sport, but it just maybe had a sort of a different perception. Through different subcultures.
Definitely. So entering into this space, what kind of problems or differences were you trying to solve with creating MAAP and the existing market of cycling market with your apparel? What kind of differences were you guys trying to solve here?
Yeah, I guess because I came at the sport with pretty fresh eyes. Jared, as I mentioned, he'd been in the sport for years, and he was already used to the landscape. And as I said, he used to make his own team kit, so he would just produce his own apparel. He'd get sponsors and he'd put together and curate the team, and he was comfortable just wearing team kit for training and for racing, and that was what he did. But for me, I was like, I didn't race, at that point. I started racing later on, but at that point I was like, well, I don't want to wear team kit because I don't race. It's a bit weird. And so I was looking at the landscape, and really what was out there, I'd probably define as two categories. There was traditional sport, which was the heritage Italian brands, Castelli, Sportful, Santini, all legacy brands from the 60s and 70s. And they're, incredible brands that, in most cases, they produce and manufacture their own apparel. So really, really great businesses. But it was very performance sport focused, and that was probably not appealing to me, coming from a sort of a design and fashion background, And then there was Rafa, Rafa are an amazing British company, the market leader now, but at the time they were really the only brand sort of coming at the sport from a lifestyle perspective, and prioritizing design on the same level as their performance.
Yep.
And that was, I started to look at Rafa, and but again, it was like maybe it's the where we're located down here in Melbourne or what, but it just, again, it didn't really kind of speak to me personally. You know, I think I have a lot of respect for the brand. But I was kind of shocked at the landscape. You know, I was kind of shocked at the lack of options throughout the industry. And coming from the surf industry, you know, I looked at the surf industry and sort of said, well, look, there's 4 or 5 big brands that sit at the top of that industry. You know, there's Quicksilver, Billabong, Rip Curl, Hurley, you know. Yeah. But in my view, in cycling, there was only one. There was just Rafa, you know. And for us, it was like, well, this is kind of crazy, you know. I think there's an opportunity here. I feel like we have a voice and a point of difference to, you know, to what is on the market. You know, I think we can come at it from a position of experience in working with brands and building brands and building product, you know. Yeah. So I think from day one, we were pretty confident, you know, that we could, I guess, provide something new to the industry, you know, and that was really what we wanted to do. So it was really, you know, to be honest, I never had ambitions of starting my own business. You know, I was always happy working for someone. You know, I loved working for Globe. I loved, you know, I guess, you know, climbing the corporate ladder, however you want to describe it. But yeah, I wasn't the type of person that sort of, you know, for early on said, I need to do something for myself. But when I looked at the cycling space and thought about it, it was compelling. You know, it was something there where I was like, okay, we have to do this. This is exciting. You know, I think we can do something cool here. So.
100%. So to the listeners' POV, can you kind of paint a picture from these early days, what that prototyping process looked like? You guys have a wide range of products today. What were some of the first products at launch, and what did the R&D process look like from your design view?
Yeah, good question. I guess, you know, Globe and the surf skate industry is predominantly produced in China. You know, I would say 95% of all our product was there, and you know, great factories, great products. I have a lot of respect for Chinese production, but it's quite tailored to the products that you're selling. So, you know, t-shirts, board shorts, you know, pants, hoodies, etc. So for us, we needed to source a completely new supply chain that was specialists in performance apparel, particularly cycling. And for us, the cream of the crop in that sense was Italy.
Yeah.
All of the best cycling fabrics, 95% of them come from Italy. Some great mills there. There's a whole industry there, you know, dedicated to cycling, which is incredible. So it was a real learning process for us. Luckily, Jared had been through, you know, years of making his own team kit in a custom sense. So, which means, you know, you order 50 for your team or 40 or 30, you know, just for certain groups. And that's what really is the foundation of a lot of those cycling factories in Italy. It's to produce race wear for teams and clubs, you know.
Yep.
So we started approaching some of the factories that he'd worked with in the past. And, you know, that was probably a 12-month process of just, back then it was phone calls. We weren't really even doing Zoom, you know, it was just phone calls and emails, and, you know, and the time zone between Europe and Australia is crazy. Like I was up at, you know, 8, 9, 10 p.m. on the phone most nights, you know, talking about what products we wanted, trying to source fabrics. And, you know, it just takes a long time because we're, you know, obviously a long way away in Australia, but it would be packages sent, comments made, you know, samples sent again. So we probably went through, I'd say, almost a year of that. Just really trying to refine what it is that our collection would be. And look, our first collection was only 5 jerseys, 2 bibs, 5 pairs of socks. You know, just like 3 products, something you could wear from head to toe.
Yeah.
But it was really narrow, you know. But we wanted to make sure that, you know, it was amazing. You know, from in terms of fit, it was all built from the ground up. You know, it wasn't anything. It wasn't sort of. It was something we had clear vision for what we wanted it to look like, and we sort of, I guess, we were sort of bouncing back and forth until we got there. Right at the last minute, we decided to fly to Italy. This was for the last round, so we sort of said, look, it's really close. All we need to do now is just get on the plane and get over there.
Yeah.
And you know, that's at that point, that's a big risk. You know, like I think when I look back at what it took from a financial perspective to launch the brand, I think we put 15,000 Australian dollars, probably like, what's that, 8,000 US or 10,000 US in each, right?
Yeah.
Just to get, which is not a lot of money, right? Just to start a brand. And, you know, you're talking about flying to Europe,
Exactly.
and using money out of that pot to sort of get over there to make sure our product and production is correct.
Was this used for inventory as well? This was inventory as well?
Yeah, that was the first round of inventory too. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, I think we might have ordered 30 or 50 of each style to start with. It was nothing,
Wow.
It was but it was so important for us to get there, to see the factory, to make sure it was all perfect. And that was, I think that paid off, obviously in spades. And plus we took our bikes and went for a ride, and I'm sure we had a pretty good time in Italy, but it was, that was the catalyst. That was kind of like, okay, we know now we can push the button on production. We know it's going to be great. We came back and we started trying to sell it. So, because we were running out of money, obviously. Yeah. And so we basically, created a lookbook and just went around and started to talk to some of the better bike shops in Melbourne, in Australia, and I think we sold out before we'd launched. We had a fair bit of interest, so it all sort of worked out. But yeah, it was, I would say, probably 12 to 15 months of development before we launched.
Wow. So I presume e-commerce is a big piece of your business now. I'm curious, in 2014 at launch, was it basically the bike shops locally in Melbourne? Was that 100% of your sales in the early days, or what did that look like?
So we started, we knew we wanted to launch a Shopify store, from day one, but we knew at the same time we would have no traffic, right? No one knows us. We had an Instagram account, there was a few people that were interested, whatever, but initially we knew we had to have both. And look, to this day, it's still probably roughly half and half, maybe a little bit tipping more into e-com, but we would never have expected that. We would have thought e-com would be, 90% of our business. It's not, it's 60% or 55%, so the wholesale accounts and the wholesale network we built has been a huge catalyst for us building the brand and growing the brand and growing awareness, and it really does work, harmoniously. They do work harmoniously together. I personally don't think you can or should have one without the other, particularly in our industry, because cycling is such a community-based sport, right?
100%.
You work with a great bike shop, you work with them as partners. They have a community themselves, and then you've got access to that community. You can, host them and ride with them and bring them into the brand. They're super valuable for us, and that's it's not something I would have expected, but it will be an ongoing part of our business, like a really important part of our business.
100%. What I think is really incredible is how respected and well known actually MAAP is here just in the United States, and how much you guys have expanded internationally. I'm curious to go back to some of those first days when you decided you want to go that international route. Did you take that route through e-commerce, or did you go through the bike shop route as well, shipping inventory to those shops? How did that look?
Yeah, both. Look, I think being based in Australia, you have to think about that from the beginning. It's really rare to have a large business contained within Australia, right? So I think if you're based in the US, there's I know a lot of businesses that don't ship internationally from there, and they're really successful large businesses, but pretty early on, I mean, we were making our product in Europe. At that point, it was 100% made in Italy, because it was efficient for us and what have you, and we were shipping it out to Australia and then shipping it back to Europe, for customers, which obviously doesn't make sense. So within 6 months, we opened up a 3PL in the Netherlands. And that almost became our sort of central product hub. So the goods would come, from Italy to Netherlands. We'd ship some to Australia, but if we needed more, we could top it up from the Netherlands, So it's sort of, we knew it sort of made sense in that sense. But it's a big financial risk, because as soon as you're duplicating your warehouses, you're duplicating your inventory, and when you've got a lot of core products that you want in stock all the time, like our bib shorts and some socks and whatever, you've got to carry those items in both warehouses. So, I think it cost us, I don't know, a couple $100,000 just to open the warehouse, just to put enough stock in there. I'm talking within six to 12 months of launching. But that was the right thing to do, and we could have signed a distributor. We could have got someone to manage it for us, but we felt confident in doing it ourselves. We sort of knew, we knew we weren't going to be working with hundreds of stores in Europe, or thousands of, we just wanted to work with the right stores. And I think now, even today, we might only have 100 stores across the globe, which is not a lot. When you look at some of the surf brands, they'd have 400 stores just in Australia. So it's still we can still manage it. We still work in most markets direct. And I think about a year after that, we opened up a warehouse in the US as well. So that was in Utah. Now we have one in the UK, and we're sort of we're just sort of expanding as we need to. But look, I'd hope we don't have any more than 4 warehouses. It does become more complicated. So it's I'm not trying to sort of. I think it's good to keep it as simple as possible, and as efficient as possible. But sometimes you just have to sort of make a call and jump in.
Definitely. So I'm curious then, what does that marketing strategy look like when you're going international? You're going against some of the industry leaders that you mentioned prior. So what does that marketing strategy look like to bring in new consumers, especially to a new market?
Yeah, look, it's every dollar we spent on marketing, we needed to make a return on. So we, in the early days, we bootstrapped this business, and it was hard because it was such a fast growing business. So there's always a lot of pressure on working capital. And cash flow. So, if we're spending money on marketing, we wanted to know that we were making, 10 times that, in return. So we really sort of funneled it through Facebook and Instagram. I remember when we launched, Instagram didn't have advertising on it. It was just Facebook at that time, which makes me sound really, really fucking old. Excuse me, really old. But so yeah, it was Facebook initially, and I was a bit cautious about that, on the sort of attribution and is it really having an effect. And, in hindsight, we probably should have spent a bit more time on SEO and sort of built that up from an earlier point of view, which is what we're sort of doing now. But we were pretty that's SEO is a bit more of a long game, and it's sort of at that point when you're sort of cash strapped, it's harder to kind of put the resources in or hire an agency to do that. Or so it was really just social media, and testing ads and also I think I've got to give a lot of credit to the community itself, because MAAP, I guess, was something that was so different at that point, like there wasn't much like it. And I think it's sort of a lot of people, would share their images, user generated content was really strong. And our organic engagement and following, grew pretty quickly. So I think that obviously for me, that was the most valuable. That was way more valuable than punching ads out through Facebook. But ultimately both channels worked for us, and building our database, email has always been a really great channel for us. So I think we had a lot of support from the industry, from the community, really, and that sort of helped us grow. And we, from day one, I think on the day we launched, we got an order from the US and an order from England, and it's like, how does that happen? We've just launched, and we've done no marketing, and yet so that's incredible. That kind of really sort of blew us away. But I think that's also a byproduct of the sport itself being such a global sport. Like cycling, back then was everywhere, and now you can, it's grown, like wildfire. So.
100%. It's just interesting you mentioned that. Just prior to this interview, I went to the Instagram of MAAP and looked at the tag photos, and it's super community driven, as you mentioned. Like in the past 5 hours, I think I found like 30 photos. So it's the UGC you guys have pumping through is truly incredible, and the biking community itself. I'm curious, from the early days and to now, do you know the main demographic for MAAP and what that might look like?
Yeah, look, I mean, we started as a men's brand as well, like as in, I guess that's, I think it might have taken us 18 months before we launched our first women's specific fits. Now it's about 30% female, which is incredible. And it's sort of been growing consistently, at that level. And there's so many more women coming into the sport now as well, which is amazing to see. Age demographic, it probably sits between, the early 30 kind of range. If you sort of say like 25 to 35 is the core sort of age or range demographic, particularly through social, I guess, if you look at it in that sense. Yeah. And then the 35s to 45s. So I just sneak in within that range, luckily. So, but yeah, so I think, look, I think when I started cycling, it definitely felt like a bit of an older man's sport, now when I look at the people that are coming into the sport, they are 25 and they are cool kids, and they are,
Yeah,
skateboarders or, surfers that want to do both, and they're proud of being a cyclist, So I think the
definitely.
demographic is starting to drop, the age bracket, I think, starting to drop, and which I think is awesome. I think it's great for the sport,
100%. I see that myself as well. A lot of the entrepreneurship ecosystem here in the US they are a community of cyclists. So I actually found out about MAAP through a guy I actually had on my podcast, Cody Levine. He's the founder of Twice Toothpaste. And I was looking at his Instagram today. He had on his story, all of his friends were wearing MAAP in California. And his father's a New York dentist and his father wears MAAP. So it really is an ecosystem that's building in all different spectrums of ages, as you mentioned. I'm curious, what would you say from launch you mentioned earlier, but what would you say differentiates MAAP to competitors today then? Some of the main differentiates.
Yeah, I think, we're sort of a brand that was built on inclusivity. I think we wanted to build products that people themselves could mix and match and put together and sort of express their own style. I sort of wanted to I never really wanted to be too prescriptive. You have to wear this with that and da da da. I just wanted to kind of create cool product that people could, be proud to wear and express their style. And, I think style for us has always been, one of the key pillars. And it's really that blending style with performance, I think there's a lot of brands out there that do performance really well, but do you want to wear it, and do you feel comfortable in it? Do you feel good in it? Or do you feel confident, walking into a cafe wearing it or rocking up to a bunch wearing that, Does it really reflect your style off the bike as well and your sensibilities? So I think, that's sort of always been probably our driving force. And, we're just sort of making product that we want to wear and that we feel comfortable in and that, that sort of inspires us. And I think that hopefully has been a point of difference from what else is out there on the market. We try and sort of push the sport forward, I'd say. We look to the future, we sort of try and break down barriers and question why things that, are the way they are within the sport, which is, quite traditional in general. So, I'd like to think we're sort of, evolving cycling and or helping to evolve the sport in that sense.
Definitely. Definitely. Well, I'd like to conclude each episode with this. If you could share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned or regret, what would that be?
Yeah, look, I think for me, I think really taking time to invest in the brand identity, sort of figuring out your point of difference, figuring out your aesthetic, your branding, out of that initial pool of money that we sort of invested into the business. We spent quite a bit of that working with a creative agency called Mass Current, which was owned by a guy, Misha, who ultimately ended up coming to work for us and is now our chief creative officer. But, that was an expensive process, but we really invested in that from the beginning. The foundations of the brand are what you live with forever, really. So it's like, I would say make sure that's built on a solid foundation. So make sure that's something that you love, that you're confident in, that you then want to run with, because that's that'll set you up for the long term.
Definitely. Well, Ali, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. And to the listeners out there, make sure to check out MAAP at maap.cc.